All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining one of our tax talks. I am attorney Joshua Sells from JM Sells Law, senior tax attorney here. And today I want to talk a little bit about a question that comes up quite a bit. I have folks who call in from just all across the state, all across the country, really. And the question is, I owe the IRS. I have whatever it is, thousands of dollars. I've had cases as high as I think the highest case so far is about $11.5 million. I have $11.5 million, whatever it is, of back tax to the IRS. So whether it's income tax, whether it's payroll tax, folks call me and they owe money to the IRS, and the question is, what are my options? So what I wanted to do today is kind of put together just a quick tax talk. We do these frequently for our clients and for our members of our newsletter, our digital and mailing newsletter, The Tax Attorney. But what I wanted to do is put together a quick series on the 6 things that you can do if you owe the IRS, because really there's only 6 options. Okay, there are 6 options of what you can do, and I guess really, maybe we could say 7 because you could do bankruptcy sometimes, occasionally. It just really depends. I'll talk about that at the end if we have time. But there's a lot of rules when you talk about whether a tax can be included in a bankruptcy. So really, bankruptcy aside, and again, we have time, we'll talk about that. But there are 6 things that you can do, 6 ways to take care of back tax to the IRS. So we'll start with the easy ones, okay? The first one that you can do, if you owe the IRS, you can pay it. If you find that you do owe the IRS and you're getting the letters, the notices in the mail, and you're afraid that they're going to levy your bank account, they're going to garnish your wages. If you have any other assets that they can take, they can seize those. Don't fall for the hype. They're not going to take your primary residence, okay? Very few instances where that would ever happen. But still, the IRS does have a lot of power, and they certainly can take wages. They can take what's in your bank accounts. They can hit you with those levies and put liens on your properties. So the first thing you could do is, of course, pay it. If you have the money available, use it. That's a quick resolution. You'll get yourself out from underneath the IRS. And you'll also save yourself a lot of interest, because interest will stop accruing when you pay that. If you have retirement funds, there are ways that we can tap into those retirement funds in a manner that avoids the 10% penalty. And I know some of you may be saying, well, I've read it, that paying off your tax debt's not a viable way to avoid that 10% penalty. And you're right. If you just pull the money out, then that's not going to avoid that penalty. However, we can actually work with the IRS to intentionally levy those retirement assets, and that actually avoids the 10% penalty. So a full pay scenario where you're going to pay the balance in full is one option. Of course, if you are going to do that, I highly recommend that we look at abating penalties. Do you know that generally a tax debt has about 40% of that tax debt as penalties, IRS penalties, whether it's the failure to pay penalty or the failure to file penalty, and we can help abate those. We have a great track record of working to abate those penalties, and so certain circumstances will allow you to remove those penalties, saving you potentially thousands of dollars. So option number 1, you can pay it in full. Option 2, okay, and I'm going to throw this out here just because this is an option. You can choose to do nothing, all right? If you owe the IRS, you can just sit there, ignore the notices, ignore the certified mailings, and if you can stomach that, hey, you know what? More power to you, but that's very intimidating. I know even for myself, when I was in that position years ago, that was a horrible position to be in, knowing that I had that hanging over my head. And so that is still an option. You could do nothing. Not a great scenario, though, because you are going to continue to accrue penalties, interest, and you are clearly still under the threat of a levy or a wage garnishment, you don't want to get into that position, especially with all the other options available to resolve those back tax liabilities. The third thing that you can do, and this is probably the one of the most popular things as far as what people have actually heard, it's called an offer in compromise. That's a settlement. And so what that means, an IRS settlement, is you basically, and there's a formula that determines what your settlement amount is. It looks at your assets and your income, okay? And so your future income, and then the available assets, and then a portion of that is what equates to your settlement. So you could be in a position where you owe the IRS $100,000, but because of the way the formula is for an offer in compromise, your reasonable collection potential at your settlement offer is only $10,000. And so you may be in a position where you owe $100,000, but you're going to settle for $10,000 or whatever that is. And so that sounds great, but there are a lot of different facets to an offer in compromise. There are a lot of rules, not just regulations, but also administrative rules in the Internal Revenue Manual. And a lot of people just file the offer in compromise themselves. It's overwhelming to do, but some people do, and they find that they get denied. And there's a lot of reasons why. You have to be current with your tax deposits or estimated tax or withholdings. You can't owe anything, and you have to be compliant with your filing all the way back. I mean, I've known the IRS to look back as far as 10, 11 years to make sure you filed a tax return in all of those years. And so there's a lot of different things that are required with an offer in compromise. And quite frankly, not a lot of people qualify for the offer in compromise. I think it was last year the IRS closed out 7 million collection cases. Don't quote me on that. I think it's around that number. Around 7 million collection cases they closed out through some kind of resolution method, and only about 25,000 of those were offers in compromise. So it's a very difficult program to qualify for. We do help a lot of our clients get into that program. That's a great program. So the third thing you can do is settle your tax debt. You've probably heard that said before as settle for pennies on the dollar, a fraction of what you owe. So that is the offer in compromise program. The fourth thing that you can do is a financial hardship. So you may be in a position where your household income is under a certain threshold, where based on the IRS financial standards, your expenses are higher than your income. And if you're in a scenario where those household expenses are up here and the income is here, again, I'm not talking about your real expenses. I'm talking about the expenses that the IRS allows you to include, okay, those national standards. If that's the case, where your actual income is here and your allowed expenses are here, then there's a financial hardship. And the IRS would put you in what's called currently not collectible. And that's basically a systematic way where you fall out of the collection cycle. They're not going to hound you. They can't levy your assets, your bank account, garnish your wages. They're not going to they're not going to try to come at you to collect that. And basically, as far as the IRS is concerned, you're temporarily out of the collection cycle. They're going to leave you alone. You'll get an annual statement of what you owe. Interest does still accrue, but they're not going to actively pursue collecting that. And that sounds good, of course, if you're close to the statute of expiration date, the collection statute expiration date. That's what's called the CSED, because all tax debt has 10 years generally. There are some events that pause that, but all tax has 10 years from the date of assessment to be collected, and then it legally falls off. After that 10-year mark, the IRS has no legal standing to collect that anymore. So we advise a lot of clients who are close to that to get into the financial hardship status. That way that tax debt just falls off and you are no longer legally obligated to pay it. And of course, if there's a tax lien that's been filed at that point when it falls off, so does the tax lien. So that's another option. That's the fourth option, the financial hardship. The fifth option is an installment agreement. So you may be in a position where, hey, your income is okay. Maybe you got some money set aside. So you have some equity in a house, and so you're probably not going to qualify for an offer in compromise. You're probably not going to qualify for financial hardship. So under the installment agreement guidelines, we're able to get you put onto an installment agreement where you're making monthly payments. The IRS has what's called a streamlined installment agreement, where basically that's the amount of tax roughly that you owe divided by 72. Okay, 72 months, and that's how you figure out your payment. That's for tax that's up to $50,000. The IRS has released what's called the expanded streamlined, and that's up to $100,000 under certain circumstances. And if it's up to $100,000, generally it's going to be the tax debt roughly divided by 84. And so there are different installment agreements that you can get on. With all installment agreements, I recommend that we look at penalty abatement. If you're in a position where you have to be on an installment agreement, you likely have a lot of penalties that have been assessed, probably thousands of dollars of penalties. And so when we get our clients onto an installment agreement, we work on penalty abatement, getting those penalties removed. So the installment agreement is a great way to get a lot of the penalties removed and get the IRS off of your back, because while you're on an installment agreement, you don't have to worry about the threat of levy or garnishment or any kind of collection actions by the IRS. So let's see, we had the number one option that you could do is full pay. Number two is do nothing. Number three, we said that the offer in compromise, the settlement. Number four, we said the financial hardship, okay, the currently not collectible. Number five, we said an installment agreement where you're basically spreading that out over 72 or 84 months. And finally, number six, it's called the partial pay installment agreement. And what this means is, generally, let me start with this. Under a normal installment agreement, you have to be able to pay the tax back before the statute of limitations expires. That's the only way they're going to accept it. So if you had 1 year left before the statute of limitations expires, they're not going to give you a 72-month installment agreement, okay? Because the clock's done. So they're going to try to collect as much as they can before the clock runs out, okay? It's kind of the fourth quarter, and the IRS is, they have the ball. So if you are in one of those scenarios where you don't have a lot of time left, you may be on what's called a partial payment installment agreement. And that's an installment agreement where you're not going to pay the full tax back. This is very similar to an offer in compromise, where you're not going to pay the full tax. And so not a lot of people qualify for a partial payment installment agreement, but it is still out there. It's still a very viable option. So those are really the primary mechanisms by which you can resolve your tax debt. So you're either going to be doing some form of installment agreement where you're stretching that tax over a certain time period. Our goal is always, if we're pursuing an installment agreement, our goal is to minimize the amount of debt. And by doing that, we're going to remove those penalties. Now remember, you can't remove interest. Interest is put on there under law, and there's no way to remove interest. However, if you remove penalties, the interest that has accrued on penalties also comes off. So basically, you have this world of installment agreements where, depending on your income and your assets, you may land into an installment agreement with the IRS. Generally, those are going to be direct debit, where they come out of your bank account automatically. And with those installment agreements, you fight penalties and get penalties taken off. And then the other side of the resolution side is doing some kind of settlement, whether it's an offer in compromise settlement where you're paying a fraction of what you owe. It's a hardship because of where you are financially, where we're able to basically push pause on your IRS account. They're going to leave you alone, hopefully until that statute of limitations, or that partial payment installment agreement where you're not really ever going to pay the full tax. So those are the two different buckets of resolution options. At the end of the day, it's going to be one of those. It seems ultra simplistic, but really you're going to fall into one of those categories. And I recommend that you do. I recommend that you don't choose the option of do nothing. That's one of the worst options that you can do. I could share horror stories with you about some clients I've had who chose that route, and their banks got hit. Their wages got garnished, and it's awfully embarrassing for your employer to get that wage garnishment and have to withhold those taxes. So if you're in that position where you owe tax, do it yourself to give my firm a call. Again, J.M. Sells Law specializes just in tax law. That's all we do, and we have a lot of experience dealing with small business clients, individuals, getting them out of collections, getting their tax debt resolved so they can actually move on with their life. One of the things that we do a little differently here, we don't charge to pull your IRS file and actually come up with a game plan for you. We invest at least 5 or 6, 7 hours before you ever even pay a dime coming up with a game plan. I can't think of any other law firm that does that. And I could be wrong. Again, I've checked around, and there's not many law firms who are willing to say, hey, the first 5, 6, 7 hours are on us. Okay? Maybe they're out there. I've never found them, though. But here we do that because we want to be able to give you the facts. I want to be able to sit down with you, whether it's in person, whether it's over the phone, and say, you know what, here we pulled your IRS files. We know exactly what's going on, what you're up against, and based on what we see and based on what we know about your financial situation, here is the best option for you, where you're going to pay the least amount of tax, interest, and penalties, and you're going to get the IRS off of your back. And we present that to you. We quote you what your legal fees would be at that point, and our legal fees are very reasonable. Again, I've checked around. So I mean, we have some of the for the value of what we offer, some of the lowest legal fees as far as a tax law firm, and we work with our clients to make tax resolution a reality, so that you can finally get the IRS off of your back. So I encourage you, if you're watching this and you're in that position where you owe the IRS, give us a call. Honestly, what do you have to lose? We're not going to charge you just to give you a case analysis of what your options are. So I hope that answered some of your questions. Again, that's the biggest question that I get. I've been doing this a while, and as a tax attorney, people will ask me, okay, Josh, I owe the IRS. What are my options? And so that's really those two buckets, either installment agreement or some kind of settlement, are really the two options. And so I'd love to talk to you about that. Again, give us a call. We definitely wouldn't charge you a dime for that. So we look forward to hearing from you, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.